notes. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm available to send it to anybody who wants, but they can
Okay.
take notes. It's more about people writing their own notes and reflecting as we talk and see how it works for them, for their company.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we can freestyle. It's all fine.
Okay. Okay, we could do that. I mean, that will be our first freestyle. So basically, I'm going to let you introduce the topic because I'm not very conversant on the topic, but I'll introduce this from my side. About in January this year, I got COVID, and I got it really bad. As I was walking through the process of, just getting better, I started to realize that, this disease is very different from the other diseases that I've had. I'm not one of those people who gets very sickly. So in those 45 days where I was at home, I started to reflect on, how things will be very different. And of course, there was the physical aspect of COVID, but there was also the psychological aspect. And I think you and I started this conversation on LinkedIn a couple of months ago. And I said, I'd love to talk to you. I'm starting this show and it's going to do blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that concerns me is that we're looking at vaccination for humans. But the current, what I call the current modern farm, is the workplace. You don't go out with a yembe to the farm and then you come back with produce and then you eat. What you do is you go out, you provide a service to an employer, a client, etc. And then they give you a paycheck, and then that paycheck you go buy food. And that's what most of us on this chat are where we are as humans. None of us, if we say lockdown today, none of us can go in the backyard and pick a tomato, pick a potato, and make a meal. So with that in mind, it started to scare me as an individual and saying, okay, listen, I'm not able to go to work. It became more of a reality to me that, okay, what about other people who are marginalized, who don't have the privileges that I have of, I'm a consultant, I go into work, I can work from home, et cetera, et cetera. But what about the person who actually needs to go out there? So that was the physical part of getting sick. But then after I started getting better, then I started to realize, wait a minute, there's a lot of things that are not happening with my body. I'm not moving as fast as I should be. Yeah. My memory is not 120% as it used to be. So then how is the employer going to look at me when I can't perform my tasks up to par? When I can't move as quickly, I need to do a board paper and the board paper is delayed because really, when I hit 3 o'clock, I was tired. I needed to take a nap. And after I took a nap, I just didn't have the motivation to move on. So on a personal level, that took place for maybe about, I don't know, maybe 2-3 months before I really got my energies levels back up. And I was grateful that my client and my other clients were able to bear with me through this process. But really looking at it from a grand scale of productivity, what happens when 20% of an organization has COVID? What happens when 30% of an organization has COVID? What happens when 60% of an organization has COVID and it's crippled that way? So I reached out to you and we were chatting, etc. But that's where my head is. So really today I'm going to do a lot more listening and a lot more questioning from you as an expert, and then I can chime in on the tech part. But I'm here to listen to you.
Karim, thank you. But please let's drop the word expert. I think people that are really interested, I got a lot of notes from friends as soon as they heard. I mean, people were pitching in, telling me the ideas from here. I have a friend, Patricia Charlie. She sent me notes and she was forwarding it because she found it was relevant. Another friend, a professor at a university in Bristol, she sent me notes as well, how they worked, the impact they had. And I realized people were looking for a platform to talk about these things. And somebody asked me, what are the solutions? And I was like, there's no solution. And one solution for one company does not mean it doesn't fit another company. It all depends on what type of company you are, the vision, the resources you have, the type of service you're giving, and especially what country you're in, right? Also, me and also our family, we got COVID in January. And as you say, you don't realize how, you hear people talk about it, but you don't know how it actually incapacitates you. I stayed in bed for a month, not having energy. And then you think of the marginalized people, those that cannot afford, that get paid every day. They get paid by showing up. And what happens to them? And I know that's a very, it's an area that you're very interested in and you're keen on it, because we always talk from a privileged position when we talk about policies and how to make this working from home new normal. And but we never think of the other side. Yeah, but I can just straight go into it if yeah.
Yeah,
so
great.
I have my notes, and I was I mean, it's part of the presentation that I sent you, but I'm wondering if people could send you messages, and then I could always compile articles as well as the presentation, and some link of YouTube where people could actually go and listen and see how that applies to their companies, or whether it's one person, a small family-owned company. Yeah. And so I think even if we finish, they could be able to, you could be able to see their request. I know already one that I wrote down on paper. It's Sunday Capesi who had asked. So, and I know him, so I'll definitely send the package. Yeah. So in ways that will have a lasting impact on workers and work. That's given, whatever country you're in. And it basically forces us to constructively talk about it. And also on, and being empathetic, because we just don't constructively talk about it, but we also have to have other aspects come into play on how to revamp our workplaces. Every country has revamped their own workplace differently. And there's so many, as I told you, I have not many points, but I could go on, because the list of how the workplace has changed is unending. It's so long, and it touches every aspect of our lives. But I'm going to concentrate on few that I feel are the areas that we have to look at now, if you have not looked at it since the COVID pandemic, the pandemic started, but also areas that will help us, as we say in French, traverser, and in Swahili, kuvuka. This area that has immobilized us in some way. So that, in areas that people have to think about now, so that they can move into the era after the pandemic. Right? So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves, how are business leaders in various institutions coming together? Because we have to work together. This is a global thing. How are we coming together to find solutions, right? How do we navigate the effects now and after? How are we preparing ourselves? When you think for HR practitioners, but owners, bosses, when you think of talent sourcing, benefits of employee, work tools, facilitation of work environment, and performance management and reward, what do you see? What are the challenges that come in mind? And what are the solutions? And these are the questions that I want people to have in mind as we speak, as we discuss, as we interact with each other, so that we can see how we can all chip in and move forward. So the first area that we have to think about is employers. How do they think? They must rethink how they do their employee deployment strategy. What do we talk about? Here we talk about, we're going to be looking at who must come to work. Okay, every business, as I said, we're different, has to think on how to make sure how to ensure business continuity. Who are those crucial people? I'm sure you've all heard And it happened. It was a joke in the office, like, oh, you're not an essential staff. I'm an essential staff. Who are the essential staff that needs to come to the office to make the business continue? And what are the areas of work that can work from home and those that cannot? And every office has to sit down and think and draft and brainstorm. Not everybody can work from home, right? So here we're talking let's think of manufacturing companies, industries that have machines that have to be manually switched on. In conveyor, let's think of conveyor belt systems, or people that do quality assurance on conveyor belts. You know, those are the type of people we have to think about when we talk about office work. We don't mean behind the desk, Nandika documents, and that's it. It's also about the industries, the factories, right?
Okay.
But also, when you think about who must come from work, who must work from the office, you also have to think about how can they safely operate from the office?
Right.
You have to look at that. How are you going to be able to social distance? What do you have in place? What tools do you have in place? Okay. And here you have to ensure safety for those that come into work, right?
Right.
And what measures are you going to invest in, are you going to put in place to protect them? And who can work remotely? For those that can work remotely, how are you going to support them? We're looking at security protocols. How many people can, if you have a database, banks, let's think of banks. I hope there will be participants from banks that can tell us about it. But how do you give them access to the system when they are not on premises? And do all staff have tasks and responsibility that are still relevant if people don't come to work? Your favorite, the drivers.
Right.
If people don't come to work, they have nothing to do, right?
Right.
If we do automation, we do scanning of documents, they're no longer messengers. They no longer have to drive people since we have meeting virtually, right? So those are the people you have to think about, right? The pandemic has too made us realize that we have vulnerable people among ourselves, right? That some duties, especially during this time, they have to work from home because of health, but also of care, because the caretakers now cannot come to you because of the pandemic. They're taking care of their own families, so you have to stay home and take care of your family. So how do we handle those type of people that are among our employees, right?
Right.
How do employer balance and be flexible for them too? Okay. So we go back to how can they work effectively, those people that want to work from home? How do we ensure they have a laptop or computer? I was telling someone a few days back, there are companies that do not like buying laptops for the employee.
Yeah.
For all the companies that have laptops, had an edge above the rest because they were able to uproot, get the laptops and go. For those that didn't, you can interrupt. Yeah, you have to move it all.
But then you're dealing with two things. The guys who didn't buy the laptops probably didn't have the right attitude to begin with, and then when you tell them at the last minute buy the laptop, and right now everybody's in a crunch whereby you don't know where your next meal is coming from, and you're telling someone buy 50 people laptops, 50 people times $1,000, that's $50,000. That's going to hit your balance sheet.
That's where we talk about resources. And that's why we have this balance room of people who survived and people who didn't. Small business that closed, some that went down, retrenched, those are the type of areas that actually affected companies, right? And then, so we can talk about this. I'm sure we can dwell more into it because funny enough, I know a company that moved all their stuff with their desk, chair, wires, photos, phone light, everything, and they install them in their homes. There's another company that I know that give them allowance every month to ensure they are comfortable. They can buy paper, pen, they can buy printers. It's a smaller company. They're only 26 employees, but still it's substantial. It's funds that you did not have in your strategic plan, when you were doing your budget planning and your projections.
But this
right?
allowed them to be more competitive.
Yeah, they are. I think they're going to be, because I don't think it's about just allowing the employee to have everything. It's your thinking, how visionary you are, how you're forward-thinking. It's all that, because everything else, you're flexible, you know? They didn't want to think about, oh, we can't afford this. They took the money and they say, we will survive. They took the risk, yeah? So when we talk about that, your favorite, the internet, the accessibility.
Right.
Accessibility, consistency in terms of electricity, the bundles, you know, all that. Then my favorite, how can they be monitored? This is an area that I work in. And so how do we, this is the biggest challenge, because everybody has asked me this, a lot of people. And I think even we had a talk on Clubhouse about this. Some people that are in here actually asked me that question. So I know there are HR people, I hope they can really give input on this as well. But how can each company evaluate their staff from remotely? But I found when I was working on this presentation, actually, with you, when reading and preparing, I actually thought companies that had a strong culture, that's my own thoughts, no statistics, but it's from experience. People that are a company that was performance-based and where people did coaching, job shadowing, and more if possible that so people can work independently. You set a culture where people work, you don't micromanage, might have fared better during this period. If you have a strong culture, you have a teamwork and a team that is valued and they value each other, staff will reach out to each other to work and see and help each other out. So they, whether it's mentally, it's work related, planning a day. I think they have people to reach out because there was such a strong bond that was done by those things that employers think it's a waste of time, which are team building exercise that you have over the years, twice or whatever. So it made it easier. And I think companies like that, if we had to do statistics right now, they are probably the ones that are more productive right now. They're the ones surprising.
But Pam, in every job description and every job advert, it says should be able to work independently and be a self-starter, self-motivator. You would think that we should all be able to do that. You know, we should all be able to wake up in the morning, go to work, and then just be like, you know, yes, I'm in my kitchen, but you know what? I'm working. These 3 hours are for the company. And then after that, I go to lunch and follow the same routine. Isn't that what education should have taught us? Sitting still?
I think, Mihai, one of the things that the pandemic has taught us and has showed us, we are different. We come from different backgrounds. We're different in terms of our limits and boundaries, our tolerance to pressure, our tolerance to stress, fear. And I think as we move forward, organizations have to have this in mind. We are all different. And when we advertise, by the way, it's the ideal person we're looking for. It's the whole package that we're looking for. But we all know we're not perfect. You cannot find everything in one package. You try as best to find the person who's closest to what you've advertised for. Okay? And they might be stronger, you know, in one area than the one you balance, right? And I think, as I said again, this is the time employers have to rethink and change how they think and how they hire, how they recruit, and what type of person you are. Diversity will make a company stronger, you know? Right. And yeah, so as we're talking about monitor, we can talk about that more later because otherwise we'll be here. I know you gave me 20 minutes. So let me just go quickly to the other points. There's also an issue about communication protocols. Policies will have to be put in place because everybody's everywhere. Who talks to the company on behalf of the company? Who can communicate to who in the company? Siwezi kukaa hapa tu nikatoka hapa nikamwandikia CEO email. There should be ways of communicating no matter what it is. Just because I'm out of the office, those lines don't fade away, but also now they have to be clear and drafted and given to everybody. So another point was, we're going to be thinking, rethinking human resources needs now. That's why our area. And so what we're going to be looking at is so we have to take a hard look on functions and positions, right?
Okay.
Which ones are needed and which ones need to be let go? Companies have let people go because they realized they didn't need them. It wasn't the right time to do that. It was bad. Some company hanged on. They gave them good packages, but people were let go. Because of the pandemic, the companies were forced to actually evaluate the manpower. What do we need? Yeah. So this will feed into restructuring.
That's a sore spot, isn't it? I mean,
Yes,
you're letting people go at the worst time possible. Is that even ethical or moral? Are there some companies that took advantage of this and just, said, oh, COVID, but really it wasn't an issue of COVID, it's just they just needed to clean up?
I see somebody writing there. I saw it popped up and I was reading when you were talking. Fred Muita is talking about, you get it, it's survival and every business will do it. Some did it because they had to. Some did it because, my God, that restructuring we've been thinking about 2 years ago and we're thinking about the payoffs, how we're going to do it. This is the time. Other people like the tourist industry. I know a tourist center hotel that laid down 500 people.
Jesus.
That I know. It was the HR director actually talked to a group of HR. We discussed and we gave her options. We brainstormed about half pay, letting people go, or cutting down the salary. Even by cutting the salary, it wasn't working. They had to let them go. So if you can afford it, you keep them. Some people had the money, the funds. And as I see someone mention, yes, the insurance. These are the time where we will need to rethink insurance. What do we do? Because you will lose your best employee. As soon as the first person can rehire them, they'll be gone. You've invested in some people, and that's the reality of life. You want your business to survive? That's the way it will happen. Yeah.
You're throwing me a lot of bitter pills. I was hoping for more cheerful conversation. But what happens to the brand that you've created? Over the years, you've created a brand where you're creating a brand where you want people to come work for you. Okay. I don't want to throw company names out there. I don't think that's very ethical. But let's assume that we had Mama and Baba Shop. Mama and Baba Shop has been in existence for 50 years. Okay. It's a global brand. And everyone knows that, everyone aspires to work for this brand. All of a sudden, you're not just pulling the carpet on the people who had the jobs, but you're also pulling the carpet on the people who are in school who wanted to work for this company. So, I mean, this is tragic.
Yeah, Mihail, it's been tragic and it's probably not ending soon, though I can see some changes already because with the vaccine and everything, we are starting to move faster. Somebody said we won't be back to normal until first quarter of 2023, but I believe in a year's time, we might be moving towards normality as we know it now. Never back to what we knew, but as we know it now. Companies are going to take risks. Losing that ground. And I'm going to talk about two other areas where companies will need to focus on and invest to be able to rebrand and to show basically the investment was going to focus now onto something else. who else can help us brand our company. And you will see, I'll mention it a bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a risk companies are taking.
Okay.
And many, but also there's also good stories out there. There are good companies that have kept people for a year. People have kept paying staff for a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's reality. It's out there. It's the truth. So there's another thing we have to look at: the contingency protocols. People didn't have them. Whether it's business, whether it's health, it's your employees, protection for your employees. So how can employers navigate the evolving pandemic? Mm-hmm. What happens when an employee tests positive? Do companies have contingency plans in place? The way we have fire drills and fire escape plans. What happens if another wave hits now when you started to go back to work? What do we do? Are we take this seriously? Other areas that I think one of the solutions in this area is people working from home. You know, there are people who can't access systems. So this is a time where employers can invest in their own employees, those are at home, to draft protocols and plans and contingencies and policies to take care of areas like this. Because you have intelligent manpower, but they're just sitting at home because they can't access your system because due to security protocols. Make them work, find work for them. And this is the time for you to get all those protocols and policies in place. We have to really look at while we do the draft and the protocols, what are the approvals for various processes? Just let's go back to the first daily wiki in March when we all had to close and go.
Yeah.
Does anybody know in your company, where do you get your approval to close? Where do you get your approval to actually ship the laptops? Who gives access and who actually closes access? Because you can limit access when people move offsite. Who does that? Can I do Mimi, IT manager, go ahead and say, Mihayo, unaondoka on the premises. We don't know when we're coming back. Tunaomba tufunge nani, your access to the system. Who does that? Whose job is it? So those are the protocols that companies have to think about. And we also have to do drills. Big corporate companies do drills. What happens if there's a fire? What happens is this. Can I go home and set up in 2 hours? So those are the new, we have to think about that now. We might never have to because people might never go back to work. But anyway. So then how can productivity losses be minimized? It all comes with the protocols. I think everybody understands. What do you do to make sure that people can uproot and in 2 hours we're set? There's a company that I won't mention because they have not given me the permission. The day they left, by midday next day, 80% were already working. They were connected, and because they've been doing drills, they have protocols, they have everything in place. Not for this type of pandemic, nobody ever thought it, but for anything else that might have happened. And that's the way business should think. How can we move home quickly?
You would think, right, being in Africa, that all companies functioning in an African state should have the same sort of protocols. You should, ni kama uko nyumbani, unajua pale anapotokea mwizi, which rooms to open, which room to grab, and which door to exit out of, and where is the safest place in that house, and which balcony you're jumping off, and then out, and which gate you're coming out of. You would think that, I mean, I often tell people, when you put grills in a house, you're actually creating a jail for yourself when it's time for you to rush out, because you can't jump out of the window. You jump out the window and you hit a grill. But then, considering all the contingencies of operating in Africa and all the associated risks that we have in operating in Africa, you would think that companies should have the protocols for you to say, okay, barabara fulani imefungwa for the next 10 days. Kwa sababu Salenda Bridge inafanyiwa repair. Kwa hivyo hatuwezi kufika mjini, si ndio? Mkandarasi hajamaliza kazi. So we should have a protocol for us to be able to work from home for 3 to 4 days. Are you saying that most companies didn't have those protocols or never imagined exercising those protocols at any point in time?
Yes.
So who's
and mostly
whose head is supposed to roll?
The risk department.
The risk department.
The senior management team, because they are the custodian of that business in the country if it's an international organization, but also HR department in terms of manpower, because we're the ones who empower them in terms of ensuring they have a conducive workplace wherever we move and they can work from wherever. I think it's become a role now for HR working with this SMT to try and ensure that this is in place. And but also there's a risk department. Big companies have that. They're the ones who actually ensure that the system keeps on running and everybody is connected if any major happenings like the pandemic. They should be able to have a contingency.
But when you're dealing with a sluggish economy, aren't those the first few departments that get underfunded?
That's true. That's true. But
and usually there's like one guy in risk and tunamjua lakini really we don't really know what they do roaming around, and then security una jamaa mwingine ambaye yeye kazi yake kudeal na wale walinzi wa getini, na if something happens luku imeisha ndio it's his problem to deal with. I mean,
yeah, but the pandemic has actually made their role more important. I'm hoping that companies now will invest in the human resources and know that they play a big, huge role. And also we HR have, with this pandemic, have realized how important and strategic it is to ensure we are hand in hand with the SMT and the risk department so that we can, and we can continue. And also it's very important for HR to also be on top of what the business does, so that we know when a contingent plan has to be drafted, what do we have to put in there? But also working with the operation heads, what do I need in place for you to keep on running the business? If we don't know the business, we can't write this. So risk department, every senior manager, HR department have to draft them, but it's also every head of department, every line manager. You have to be on top of things and know kwamba kesho nikiamka kitu hatuwezi kupita Salenda Bridge, tunafanyaje? Nani, who's my top guy in the department who has it in his laptop who can continue business? Who is the guy who can actually run around? Who's the good communicator who can actually call all our clients in the next 2 hours? Yeah, those are the things, right? But also when we're talking about losses, we also have to rethink on how we engage with our customers. That's where it comes in. How we sell, where, and how. It's no longer the protocols and the hows have changed, because now you're dispersed. So how does it work? We have to start thinking locally because mipaka ilifungwa, and we also have to be environmental awareness now, because now it's become a top topic because watu wamekaa nyumbani, magari yamesimama, petroli so, but there's loss, but there's also gain. So how is it continue? But also financial resources, as you say, what can we invest in so that there's less disruption in future and in our pockets as well, right? So I'm gonna go straight into the next topic, which is the human resources and standard operating policies and procedures. Okay. They were not adequate. Few companies have them. They were adequate. A lot of people are struggling right now. You have no idea how many questions I get about performance assessment. We go back to that. How do you monitor staff off, right? But a very interesting thing I read, Nyayo, is like the Industrial Revolution is what brought mambo ya check in on the door and coming to the office. Before people were paid by what they produce. And we
Right.
caught on. Imeanzia huko first world, imekuja. We also caught. Tunabidi tuende VC. And that will be a thing of the past. It will become so irrelevant because now we're going to be looking at performance. What can you produce for me? But also when we look at the policies now, there will be performance management policies. How do you assess? We need to re-emphasize the importance of line managers. How do they interact with each staff? Virtually now, not longer and ile zamani ya kwamba tunakutana, tunacheka, tunamaliza, and then kwaheri, we done the assessment, it's the past, because we will have to tie to the KPIs to the goal. So to be able to do that, we have to draft proper goals. Hizo goals za mwanzoni itabidi tuwe na one-on-one, lengthy, thorough, because hatuonani, so it's very difficult also to do body language na kuwa na, so there's a lot of things that is coming to play in terms of how best to implement the performance management system in each company. Hata kampuni ndogo sasa hivi itabidi invest, kwa sababu watu wako kwa kule, you have to have the tools on how to be able to assess and be able to see how your profitability keeps going up.
Right.
So these are the routine check-ins, giving constructive feedback. Wale ambao walikuwa wajui jinsi ya kumotivate watu, they'll have to learn now. You have to keep the morale up, because you remember that we talked about mental health. And as I said again, zile blah blah sessions. You do, you're good. Let's continue working. Zimeisha, no longer effect, because also this will feed into ukitaka kumondoa mfanyakazi.
Right.
Unamuondoaje kama wewe hujampa constructive feedback that is meaningful, that is tangible. Sio blah blah tena umempa tu blah blah, tuendelee na kazi, you did good. So there's also wellness policy. This one, ndio hapa tunakuja. How do we deal with sick leave? How do we deal with wale wanaumwa, right?
Right.
How do we support women workers? Because wanawake wengi, they're the ones who are affected. Because wanawake wengi ndio wanafanya face-to-face work. They're the majority. And they're the ones who had to stay home because they have kids, they have, they lost jobs. But how do we support these people in terms of leave, allowance, time off? And we do know that suicide rate, domestic violence, depression has increased, and not just about among women, as our total, because 15-year-olds, they are now thinking, my year is gone. A whole year, I couldn't go out, I couldn't play sports, I couldn't interact with others. So
I couldn't go on a date.
I couldn't go on a date. So how can employers lessen the burden of parents? Because parents are the employees. Healthy employees is higher productivity, that we know. So, and employers have to reevaluate their insurance package. I know everybody says, oh, it can't change. It can change. Employers have to get together. Employee has to force and push so that enough pressure, health insurance become better. Imagine ni hayo, mtu ana health insurance, alienda kapima siku ya kwanza, ya pili akahitaji oxygen akalazwa. Ametoka na bili si chini ya milioni 6. Kama amesurvive. Unfortunately, if we lose that employee, mke wake ataendelea na familia kulipa hiyo milioni 6 mpaka 10. That is an area that I think every employee should think about. Even if it didn't happen to you, it could happen to you. Every HR and manager, we have to safeguard our employee. The amount of money we're paying insurance company, we should have enough clout and enough, we should come together. We should have enough unity, force to change. It may not be the best, but we can change something, even if it means paying a higher premium.
Okay, you're paying a higher premium, but let's talk about that particular aspect. So one of my questions was, let's talk about vaccination. If you're vaxxed, then you are asymptomatic and most likely to the same strain. Let's not get into the science of it, but it just means that you get it, you don't feel that sick. But then one the first scenario is one person decides that I'm not going to get vaccinated, and they're at a greater risk in your place of employment of catching COVID, right? The other employee now has the burden of saying, oh, Yuma pale amekataa kupiga vaccine, lakini kwa sababu mimi I have a conscience and I understand this thing better than Yuma, I'm going to wear a mask. All of a sudden, Yuma gets COVID. Okay? Now that guilt and that moral feeling is now on Mihayo, because I know more than likely, mimi sijaonyesha symptoms, lakini nimemuinfect Yuma. Yuma is on oxygen. Mungu mwema, Yuma lives. Mungu kampenda zaidi, Yuma dies. What kind of environment do you have when you have, you know, this issue of choice? Should companies actually just say, you know what, if you're not vaxxed, don't come in? Work from home. And then how long is then the company liable for that person's personal choice of saying, I don't want to be vaxxed? So now I'm going into your lawyer experience.
No, it's not a lawyer issue. It's not a lawyer area you're going to. It's a sad reality. And I think, I always believe the practice, we get the practice from the first world, from other countries that we are similar to. And tukiangalia hizo nchi where they're moving, we will come a time where people ambao wataki vaccination watakuwa wanatafuta kazi kwenye kampuni ambazo zina policy zinazowaruhusu. It will happen. Might not be today, tomorrow. It might take 2-3 years, but it will happen. Because sasa hivi pia sisi ambao tumevaccinatiwa tutaanza kusema sitaki kukaa na huyu mtu sasa hivi kwa sababu naogopa. I don't want that guilt. Right? Because yeah, it's a guilt that you live with. Because especially if you find out that you actually had it, na ulitoa kwa mtu fulani, and you're the one who gave this person. But then there are people we have to be understanding. Kuna wale ambao hawawezi kuvaccinate because they have pre-existing condition that does not allow them, that if they take the vaccine, it might take them hapo hapo. So how do we handle that? And this is where I think somewhere I might have mentioned that is Tanzania, East Africa will need to make its own rules and practice, because our rules will never be the same from like the first world. The first world have other options. And hata ukiwa una kazi utapata sijui stimulus yako au utapata $300 a month. We don't have that luxury. We will need to make our own rules on how to deal with this. And each company will need to make its own rules on how they deal with vaccinated and unvaccinated people. But the practice in the long run, in the few years, it will take over. And that's what most companies will follow. Because as we move.
I was reading through IG just before logging in with you, and in Chicago, a judge has denied custody to a mother who was not vaxxed. I mean, this is some serious stuff.
Yep.
You know, to be denied custody and visitation of your child because you're not vaccinated, that's serious.
Yeah.
So
but this is a picture of what's going to be happening. It's because in that area where they are, right, the belief is if ukama uko vaccinated, it means you're careless. So if that's the believer in this house, it means anything that happens in this house will be judgment and decision will be based on that belief. In a lawyer way, mina ilo kwa nini judge, because I read it too. If you can't take care of yourself and you believe could take care, how are you going to be able to take care of your child? But then again, that should not be, because I feel like if sababu kuna wengine ni beliefs kwamba naamini kwamba sitakiwi kufanya kwa sababu of my faith. Are we going to go into that now? So it's a very shaky gray area, and I believe it will be molded as we go.
So you're saying that potentially some of these issues that the pandemic has brought about are going to be more social movements, similar to religion and faith, and not more so about work-related issues. It's like when France had issues. Well, okay, when France had issues with the hijab and coverings, or when I don't know. There's so many scenarios whereby certain practices weren't available. You know, in the United States, you can't marry more than one wife, but there's Muslims there and there's Mormons, so there's exclusions. Do you think then there will be companies that will be set up that will be pro-vax, and there'll be companies that will be set up that will be anti-vax? And in that sort of situation, where do you intersect? Does it mean that society is going to start being polarized at some point in time, the way we're going?
I may be wrong, but I don't think there'll be a company that will be anti-vax. I think there'll be a hybrid. But there will be company that will be pro-vax. We have started seeing it. There are companies that are telling the employees stay home because when I go back, who are sued. Okay?
But then they can be sued for discrimination.
Yes, they can be sued for discrimination too, but they can also be sued. Umeniletea watu ofisini, making me liable, kujiprotect extra kwa sababu hawa watu hawajanani. Mimi natakiwa niwe more careful, wakati yeye pia natakiwa awe careful. You're giving responsibility to me to take care of myself and to take care of that person who's not vaccinated. So, ukweli tunaongelea the future for Tanzania, but and we will be led by what will happen in other countries.
Okay,
that's my belief.
Okay, I'm going to let you finish your pointers, and then we can.
I'm going to go
let some people,
because I see a lot of questions, and I think I want to get to the discussion. So, as we were talking, the standards, the policies that need to be on performance management, wellness policies now need to be part of our life, a healthy, balanced lifestyle. But also, we need to support women, as I said. And as again, I said, we have to reevaluate our insurance, our health insurance coverage. So the next point will be virtual work. That requires new skills and attitudes. People take this for granted, but we really do. How many Zoom have you done that have gone wrong, or people can't log in, or, you know, so this will necessitate employers to take out a hard look on how to up the skills and to look at the skill set in their own companies. So we're going to be looking on how effectively to use communication and collaboration platforms. We need to train people on that. And companies will have to have experts, and because some have become expert. Oh, I want to talk about Tumia, but many are still struggling. How do you make a presentation? You know, like me, I had to practice. You know, I'm over the millennium, I'm not the millennium group. So you have to practice before. Kuna mwingine nikimleta mtoto wa kaka yangu hapa, probably go, and he's so young, he'll probably be able to manage. So we need to take time to train and bring people up to date to be able to. What's the struggle? Because every time there's a Zoom meeting, people will be like, oh my God. No, we want to say, oh, there's a meeting, and quickly they log in and it's smooth. So do we invest in it? Do we have the resources? Those are the things we have to ask. But the audience should look at that. And how is our attitude when we're told to work from home, right? We need to work virtually. Tunabidi tubadilike wa Tanzania. What's our relationship with work now that we are working from home, right? How do we build a better future, a better environment to allow the modalities that come with working from home to function properly, right? To be successful. Will remote work be sustainable? We need to think about that. How to maintain focus despite working remotely. This is something that we never learned, because now we don't have a line between home and work. But then there's tons of videos, lectures, articles people should read. Do we have to reading culture? That's another question. So we might have to do small sessions virtually. But also, this feeds into how do we manage, even if when we do trainings, how do we manage connectivity and affordability? How do we do induction sessions? So is the culture where we brought up to work alone? There are people who have never, since they finished graduate school, worked by themselves. Can they manage? Are they the ones struggling? And basically we have to look at what do we take for granted and we thought worked, and be keen and discern where it's not working so we can do something about it. So there's a big area is virtual capacity building versus in-person training. Here we're looking at what gets lost as we become more, as we see the hours are long and it doesn't seem there's an end to it. How are we going to handle the challenges of doing training for people who like me, who train people? When I'm supposed to train a team of people on how to do performance assessment or writing goals, does it become easier as we go? Does it apart from becoming easier, are there new tools out there? You're an IT person. Are there new tools that are coming that will help us navigate this area better? Okay. So as I said, there's also videos, training, and everything out there that can help people. And again, the challenges of training virtually. As a trainer, you need the energy from the group.
Right.
You don't see it. Kuna wengine watakuwa wameshaondoka hapo wakati you're training. Somebody went in the kitchen, got a glass, came back. It's so hard for you to keep track. And it's so hard for you to also notice who's lagging behind, who needs extra attention. And those are the challenges that are going to stay unless there's a tool that can zoom into each attendees and see the emotions. But otherwise, it's going to be, it's still challenging and it will continue to be challenging. But also, because of vaccination, we can now go into workspace and make the training rooms are becoming different. So architects and interior designers have a lot of work to do on how you can sit people comfortably and safely and actually do the training. And now that sijui watu 24 kwa classroom is the best size group, it's going to be shrinking now. It's going to become smaller, maybe even half of that, and have many sessions, right? And I'm going to go quickly to the last one, will be the branding, right? Okay. As I said, again, there's so many areas that we can talk about. We can even talk about space, how space is going to be changing, how we're going to be sitting, how we're going to be doing a hybrid, working from home, full-time or hybrid, or who's going to be coming, what positions might always be working from home or not, what they call them, the knowledge jobs that need to come in, So the last one is mostly about branding. And you might ask, how does this go into the workplace, but also as an HR? But we're increasingly moving to social media platforms because people are home. You remember you asked a question in the beginning. How do you keep your brand so that you can attract the best talent? We will use social media. We will need to invest in that. For companies that are not doing that, they will have to do it now. And this is a resource that's becoming more formal. Meaning the how do they call them? Influencers might become future contractors. They might become consulted. And what started as a mere trend for the art world, moving into fashion, into beauty. And now we're seriously going to be looking at business branding. they're going to have to take it seriously. They're going to be looking for people that are crowd pullers. And now with the pandemic, we're going to see this area more structured for businesses, and we're going to be seeking out conversation starters. Literally, yani unavyokuwa unatafutaga mfanyakazi with the best graduate results, our best track record. We're going to be looking for influencers ambao they have their conversation starter. When they start something on social media about a product, it will go on for days, and the whole world, the whole country knows about it because of that conversation. So they need to be able, so we're going to, HR going to be looking, HR, we're going to be working closely with operation and marketing department to be able to seek out those people that can drive conversation across social media so that business can drive the message across the target market for customers, but also for employees, potential talent. And this, as I said, will need better terms of reference, contracts and agreement. We'll need to be take into account the lessons that we have learned throughout the pandemic and before, and see what's trending now. And this to be meaningful will require this area to be curated by communication specialists. So that's an area people have to invest in. So people that understand the dynamics of social media. As I said again, social media is not going to be used only for kuuza your product. It's going to be for everything. That's what we're going to be communicating if we have a crisis, if we blundered, if we want to promote women, we want to promote equality, and we want to show the world that we welcome disability and that we are flexible, right? We're going to be using social media. Again, the questions that I've thrown out there is what we need to keep on asking ourselves every day. As I said, they will become comfortable. We're going to have to brainstorm, to think. As I said, nothing fits. Whatever it fits for one small company does not necessarily fit for another small company. The big companies have the resources, have the means, and they'll fare better. They felt the point, but they'll fare better.
But you're saying the bigger companies, again, I'm going to ask Frank to unmute and unvideo Kaka Fred na Dada Victoria, so that they've asked so many questions. I feel that we should just have an engagement with them. We're going to try this for the first time with you, Pam. So you, from an HR perspective, help me manage this.
No problem.
We usually only have 2 people, so now we're going to have the 4 of us talking.
I like it.
Great. But then as they're being unmuted, what about our babies? We've talked about the workplace, but the workplace starts from a schooling perspective. And I'm throwing this out there for the 3 of you. These kids, they're not interacting at school. Where do you expect them to get social skills from? They're dialing in. And those are the kids that can actually dial in because they're privileged. But then you've got kids, other kids, who shule ikifunga imefungwa, which means that we're going to have from 2019 to 2021, we're going to have a gap year, right? That's a pretty big gap year where kids were just not going to school properly. What is that byproduct in 15 years from now, in 2048? What do you see as the future of that? Are you going to have a buy digital and buy physical type of thing where they live in a digital world and they respond in a digital world and they respond differently to a physical world? Again, Kaka Fred, Karibu, Dada Victoria, Karibu. Your questions and your contributions, please.
I think contribution more. They should come in.
They should contribute. Okay, your contributions.
Yes, contribute and then ask.
And ask. Dada Victoria.
Vicky.
The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very interesting, timely, and insightful discussion and contributions. I agree with a lot that has been shared. And to be honest, in our circumstances, it's very sad because, as has been mentioned, the workplace, no workplace is similar. Right? Even within a workplace, you have the knowledge workers And then you have the others who are hands-on, the essential workers, the support workers. But some of the good stories that emerged with regards to the first question, what do you do with your drivers? Last year, a colleague had shared that what their small firm did is they decided to pool their vacation days and use those funds to subsidize the drivers. So there's a lot of positive stories that came out. And by subsidizing the drivers, they realized that actually, on average, it was maybe giving up a couple of days of their own vacation time because it's paid leave, and that budget was then used for the drivers. So there's some creative things that are being done. So obviously, some of those companies that Pam mentioned that are still working from home have so many hybrids. There's shifts that are going on in order to manage the physical space and the physical contact. But my comments in the chat room, and I'm sorry I forgot to put them in the Q&A, were around, how could companies take advantage of the pandemic to lay off people? I just wanted us to remember that in this country, we did have some restructuring or some, there's a term that they use for it, but there was basically a correction that was taking place in our economy, where we had to ensure people were paying the right amount of taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And that meant that there was an economic slowdown. So obviously, for those organizations that were, in the general ward, COVID just knocked them out, and they had to make some serious financial decisions. So not all employers are self-serving in that case. And I think somebody quoted Dr. Fred as saying it's a long game about survival. Absolutely. But it also has to do with agility. And as Pam said, those companies or organizations that already had a safety mindset. So whether it was a factory setting, that already had safety and had an infrastructure in place, it was easier for them to do. As far as the backup and business continuity, I think that applies in the banking sector, perhaps other IT settings. So obviously they also had that advantage. But recalling my old days of working in corporate, the BCP, the business continuity plans or the business recovery plans were really handled at a high level. So I think another takeaway, as Pam is saying, you got to do those drills. You have to involve everybody. And there has to be a lot of communication with regards to, the liability of an employer. So and the lawyers know this more than I, vicarious liability. So in a situation like COVID, where as an employer, you provide, you have the protocols in place, you provide everything that you can, but people still get infected. Where does personal responsibility and vicarious liability come in? What if you are interacting with customers
for those of us who are not in HR, what is vicarious liability? For dummies.
It's not an HR term, it's a legal it's a legal term, and Sunday Kapesi and Pam can chip in, but basically it means that you carry you're responsible for what happens either in your premises or in your business. So for example, your driver knocks somebody off, runs somebody over rather, you have a liability, you're responsible. So you cannot abdicate responsibility. So that's how you get sued, etc. So we also have force majeure. So last year, I guess we could claim that the pandemic was a force majeure. Nobody saw it. Now it's going on 2 years. So I don't know. And you also talked about the issue. Sorry, go ahead.
So the Charlie Apo, I had a funny question, which I think I asked, but I want to ask it the way I wrote it. Is our culture really tuned to working from home? And what I mean is, Mama Mdogo na Shangazi, who is visiting you over the weekend, or not even over the weekend, they're visiting you and they're on lockdown, Then wewe uko hapo unadonoa kama hivyo alivyo Pam hapo nyumbani, lakini tunajua kwamba kuna mtu anamsumbua hapo moving around in and around her, and they're not really respecting her space of her virtual workspace at home. Kwa hivyo, I don't know. And then on top of that, anakuona kama vile upo tu unaangalia Netflix and listening to music. That's number one. That's scenario number one. Are we prepared? Are our homes prepared that way? Culturally, tuna hiyo demarcation of space. Namba mbili ni mara pa wewe umejikuta kwamba uko samaki au uko zako somewhere in Masaki au uko somewhere uko Kidimbwi, ukapiga picha zako ukaziweka Instagram, ukaziweka Facebook, umejisahau kwamba somewhere along the lines you were supposed to be working from home and you were supposed to be to be safe and isolating. Ukipiga hiyo picha ukaposti, hapo mwajiri ana haki gani? Kwa mfano, kwa sababu mimi nakulipa wewe working from home. Nimemaliza.
Absolutely.
Dada Charlie, una break up kidogo.
Is umemaliza. Okay, in terms of culture, no, I think for us less so than other more advanced societies, perhaps. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. You're good.
Tigo, yo. Am I still breaking up?
No, you're good. You're good. You just dropped the bomb on Tigo.
You can hear me now. Okay. Yeah, my network has been. Okay. With regards to our culture, you're right. For a long time, the idea is we work outside the home. But over time, that's slowly been changing. And clearly, the pandemic has made us take that big leap. But we're not the only ones. I mean, last year we saw in the US and in the West, especially with their kids working from home, some kids had to sit in the kitchen.
Dada Charlie, at party, you're breaking up.
Because
Hi, Vicky, you're breaking up.
Space is that small. I do know of a lot of companies that struggled because it was an imposition on the employee. We needed the employees to turn their working space. But okay, Dr. Fred, I'm sure since I cannot predict my name. Fred, can you ask for guys?
Okay.
Sorry, we'll switch.
Winter, can you, Kaka Fred, Winter, can you jump in?
Dr. Fred.
Thank you, Mihayo and colleagues.
Chip in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You're good.
Oh, thank
yes,
you.
we can, Fred. Karib.
Well, first of all, apologies for jumping in the chat box instead of going to the Q&A. Apologies, please. Then I also want to know how many minutes I can use to talk on this call so that I don't take all the time for the others to contribute. But I really want to share a very, very explicit real-life scenario of the COVID and the workplace that I've personally really championed, and maybe perhaps we can learn or borrow a leaf or lesson from it. And as Pam really brought it up very clearly, it's not a one-size-fits-it-all, and every organization has its own way of dealing with things. But at the end of the day, there are some broad generics that we can learn from each other and borrow from experiences. I think I work in Uganda, and we've really been hit with COVID extremely, very, very, very hard. And some of the issues we discussed herein, we've really been grappling and dealing with them since last year when COVID began. We've been in three lockdowns, real serious lockdowns to this point in time, some ranging up to 3 months or 40 days or 90 days or thereof. But the main thing in COVID is adaptability. That's number one. And I love the Darwinian theory of adaptability and survival. It's going to be survival for the fittest. If we adapt, we survive. If we don't adapt to the new ways of working, then we are eliminated from the old platform. But having said that, you know, people are what we are, and we just need to change our work styles and cultures and orientations and perceptions towards work. Of course, productivity remains a very big thing in many organizations. How do you keep afloat and ensure that your staff is productive? But having said that, the main thing in this pandemic that I have personally learned, and I'm sure all of us are going to learn it if we haven't learned, is nobody's indispensable. And businesses, shareholders still want value for their investments and return on investment, but also take care of the people that give them this value. So ways of working, I said ultimately the heads of businesses have to take responsibility for this, because they're the business heads who really engineer and drive businesses through any motions. What are the investments that they're making? Are they investing rightfully and enabling people to navigate through any eventualities? Hence, investment in technology comes very handy. I would say that I work in a company that has heavily invested in technology. So it was quite very easy to switch into working from home and really juggling through the hybrid of office, working from home. It came a time when absolutely nobody was allowed to come and work from the office apart from field staff. Personally, I have some team members that I've not seen for the last 1 year and 2 months, but they're extremely very productive. It's like we meet every day, especially the female employees and mothers. They're extremely very happy to keep on working from home than even coming to office. And having said that, it's all a culture, it's all a perception to change people's mindsets that this is the new normal and this is how we're going to work. But in as much as we want people to change their mindsets, have we enabled them? Are we moving away from the culture of everybody must work on a desktop and enable people to transition into laptops, which in any case are even cheaper, are more portable than desktops? And are our people ready to embrace this? Have we created that capability for people to transition into this? Having said so, again, HR has a daunting task to re-engineer business processes in terms of SOAPs, that's standard operating procedures, in terms of rejigging our HR manuals, in terms of communicating what the changes are. We really need to move from the traditional way of communicating to our teams and really refit them into the new norm, which is the digital world, as Pamela really brought it quite very clearly. At the beginning of the pandemic last year, we have some executives who could not even log into a Teams meeting or into a Zoom meeting and hold any credible meetings on Zoom. So those are some of the emerging knowledge-based talent areas that we're looking at. Even millennials found it quite very difficult to really engage in virtual meetings. You go into a virtual meeting for the men, sorry for all the guys on the call, you forget that you're on tie, you go to a call in a boxer, and when the meeting is over, you forget and stand and move on. And people are like, oh my God, what's going on here? So those are some of the realities that are emerging in the new normal that needs to be addressed. But investment in technology and mindset and culture is extremely very important. And COVID protocols. I don't know what stage we are in my country now in terms of COVID protocols at the workplace, but many companies have invested very heavily in COVID protocols at the workplace in terms of disseminating the ideas, in terms of offering the necessary PPEs, but at the end of the day, also encouraging people to get vaccinated. I'm sure there was a heated debate here. What do we do with the unvaccinated? And I believe Pam, Dada Vicky, and the rest of the team on the call, and Brother Mihayo, it's just a matter of time. It is coming. There is no way organizations are going to say safety is our paramount virtue, and then some people choose to get vaccinated and others choose not to get vaccinated. We're going to draw a thin line between love and hate, I would say, and say, guys, I'm running a business. You either choose to get vaccinated and keep your job, or choose to not get vaccinated and quit. And it's going to come, because there's no way you're going to risk up the rest of your workforce because of a few people who don't want to get vaccinated. We've seen it in the States. We've seen Saudi Arabia already embracing it. if you're not vaccinated, don't come to work. You saw the other day in Kenya, the teachers were being told you either vaccinated or stop working. Even here in Uganda, it's already that way. Teachers have been advised, if you're not vaccinated, don't go to class and teach our children. So it's just a matter of time. And as Pamela put it very clearly, it's a cultural thing. How do we re-engineer ourselves and embrace working from home and not working from tips or working from Kidimbwi or working from Samaki? You know, how do you measure the productivity? But in as much as you measure the productivity, have you enabled your team to be measured productively? Have you given the tools of work? Have you given them the data, the laptops or the palm tops or mobile phones that are adapt to all these? Do they have smartphones? But like where I work now, we started all these with good intent, but sustaining them became very expensive. So we told guys, look here, you're working from home, you're not spending fare, or you're not paying for fuel, the risks of COVID are very low, so buy your own data and be productive, or come to work and expose yourself to the risks of COVID and spend money on your lunch, on your fuel, etc. People chose, let me work from home, sustain my job. But people have lost jobs, it's real. But again, organizations should be very empathic and not use these as a time to lay off people, but non-performers will definitely be laid off because they cannot toe the line and really dance to the new tune of the current world. But another bigger thing is medical insurance. Medical insurance has to be rejigged. We had an issue last year with our medical insurers across Uganda. But we told these medical insurers, guys, look here, when you look at the user cost benefit analysis in terms of the user ratios, you have to cover COVID. And as we speak right now, all the insurance companies in Uganda are covering COVID, right from hospitalizations to testing, to pre-testings, to oxygen levels at grid rates. And I think HR gurus should go back to the drawing board, discuss medical insurance companies, put the numbers on the ground. And if you want to be the game, ensure that you're good at the numbers that you present the medical insurance. Sure, these are the profits you're making. These are pandemics, a disease like any other disease that's coming into masses. This is a time to show empathy. But above all, also, mental health is extremely, very, very critical. Many people have lost parents, many people have their dear ones, and then they have to come to work or they have to deliver. And these are time for companies to show a lot of empathy to their teams. I don't know how strong wellness clubs or wellness policies and processes are strong in organizations, but personally, I have put these, I've been discussing with Pam in different forums. This is a time to stand with our people. Like, I empathize with Mihayo, you were sick, or Pam, you're sick, yet you had to work. This is not a time to push people to work when they cannot work. It's a time to really go through their mental motions and quill that, guys, your jobs are safe, you're not alone in this. Jobs are there. We have to walk through this motion that you get well to come back to work. And they saw the long COVID syndrome. Some people don't talk these things, but they go through a lot of hell trying to adapt in the new normal. But at the end of the day, colleagues, it is the culture change that we really need to drive very, very assertively in our country. And I think the HR gurus on this forum should be at the forefront and driving this cultural revolution in terms of how do you orient staff into your organization virtually using the technologies that you've invested in? How do you drive your trainings virtually in the current pandemic? And sorry to the training companies on the call, actually interactive training classes is going to die pretty very soon. It's going to be a thing of the past because many organizations are fast and quickly embracing the virtual ways of learning, the virtual ways of training, which is the new normal. It is cheaper process. It is more interactive. It is more embraced by the millennials and some age groups. And also look at it, how do you exit staff virtually with very minimal interaction and keep people safe? And I want to wrap it up by saying that any pandemic comes up with a new revolution of doing things. Let us embrace it, learn new ways of working, and keep learning every day. But as Pamela and as I say, and as Dada Victoria also said, it's not a one-size-fits-all. evaluate your own businesses, and depending on your business leaders, if they don't support you, you will never make any inch of progress in engineering a cultural revolution in an organization. So the top leadership must embrace these changes before they spill over to the rest of the workforce. Thank you.
Asante sana Kaka Fred. As I hand over to Sunday, I have a fundamental itch when it comes to these sorts of topics. And that itch is, we're talking about the 2%ers or the 3%er, as my father would say. You know, we're talking about the bougie Africans, those of us who can afford a laptop, those of us who can do that. Are these solutions scalable for the rest of our people? Because right now we're addressing 60 million Tanzanians, we're addressing 5 million Tanzanians in urban areas. Ukishafika Msata huku ukianza kwenda inabidi usubiri mpaka ufike Bagamoyo for us to be talking about this topic. What about bibi yule kijijini au shangazi yule kijijini? My auntie who has a 1-acre farm in Usangu Flats, and for her it's all about just basic survival. Because remember, those are the customers. Whether you're a mobile operator, those are your customers. You're a cigarette company, those are your customers. You're an FMCG company selling foods and packaged foods, those are your customers. You sell soap, you're a Unilever, those are your customers. How do you protect those customers? How do you actually sustain those customers? Because you can keep these companies alive, but all these customers are dying. You know, I wish I was in the telecom industry again, whereby I can go in and see how many SIM cards have been deactivated on the networks, and that will tell us how many people have died of COVID over the last 6 months or over the last 6 years, or in terms of 90-day deactivations versus last year's 90-day deactivations versus 2018. Sunday, the floor is yours.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you, Pam. This has been very, very insightful. So for me, it will just be to highlight the things that really touched me the most and hopefully add a thing or two that's not been mentioned. So on vaccine and not vaccine and medical updates, my contribution is, it's amazing how this pandemic is evolving. No one is questioning anyone about lockdowns anymore like last year. I think as Tanzanians, we were either pro our position last year or we were really for it. And now we've proved to the world that there's no one size fits all when it comes to lockdowns. So I think on the issue of medical updates, companies should now have a policy in place where they update their staff and their staff's family on the current WHO or medical practices in the country, because vaccines are still being produced. We're now talking about boosters in the US, for instance. So there's so much misinformation out there. How do we counter that as companies and individuals? Then I think you should have a proper resource for updates. And at the company level, it will always be good to know who has it, who at home has it, who's not coming to work, what are the protocols around replacing that person temporarily, for instance. And I think Pam touched on most of those, which was very important. As many know, I contracted the Delta virus over a month ago, got hit pretty hard, but I've made a full recovery. And what did I learn from that? I think the African philosophy of those you work with are the ones you go to Kidimbwe with is actually a very good one for these times. Why do I say so? Because how are you going to know if people are working remotely, if someone is ill or not, unless you really check in on someone? For instance, everybody knows I'm not one for contributing stuff on social media until probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. Challenged myself to get out of my comfort zone, show some vulnerability, and explain my story. You know what's happened since? I've had people in ICU call me and go, man, it's just my family that knows I'm here with COVID. I read your article. Thank you for reaching out. I learned 1, 2, 3, 4. And I was stunned and happy and shocked at the same time to think that just an article got a friend to break their silence and tell me what they're going through. I think from an insurance perspective, people have mentioned that, but it's very important now, our habits of not having key man insurance, not reading into insurance. I was in hospital at Aga Khan. I had no coverage whatsoever, and that was more Uzembe, to be honest, not the case anymore. So these are those key areas that people should be discussing outside of the misinformation that's dominating the news. I think Pam and Victoria would be mentioning very much now about recruitment and almost having a substitute. In football, you have substitutes. So right now, what happens if, God forbid me, how you get another attack? What happens in your company? All of a sudden, a key leader is out of commission. Do we have a substitute? Do we have a deputy who knows what's supposed to happen immediately? So I think this protocol should be updated very, very quickly. And it's easy to look at what's out there. Pam mentioned again, there's so much material out there. I'm now conscious about this stuff. I'm on this call not as a lawyer. I'm on this call as a human being, learning from my friends and other people. And there's so much that I already know just because I got it. So those that who haven't got it, how far behind are they? And let me finish off with one last point. Mm-hmm. We've talked about adaptability. We've talked about being agile. And now I realize there are many people out of the job and are starting their own companies like myself. And there are those who are still on the job, but things are changing very quickly. So I make this appeal to everyone now that we must deliberately check on each other. You must call a stranger, you must call a friend and just go, how are you doing? We focus on patients like Mihayo was. But Mihayo and I think will agree that our primary caregivers, our moms, our wives, our children, our siblings needed to be checked into. The amount of stress they were under because we were in hospital, not knowing when would come out or recovering was huge. And I don't see that discussion. You know, if the boss is out with COVID, who's checking in on the boss's wife? So the idea, like in the West, where, you know, you work 8 to 5, after that, we don't talk to each other. I think COVID is challenging that. This is a once in a lifetime pandemic. And in our lifetime, it's really shaking all practices right now. And if you can help, you can. If you can't, you listen. So with that, that's a Sunday's contribution. Thank you very much, guys.
Asante sana, bro. Now, pole sana, I see you're making a steady recovery, but take it easy. It takes a couple of months, if not a couple of years, I would say. I got COVID in January, and I'm still not there. But before we go to closing statements, and of course, Pam will give, since this is your day, we'll give you the bulk of it, but I would like to start with Dada Victoria, then Kaka Fred, and then finally with Dada Pamela. But kuna swali hapa kutoka kwa Yasmin Chali, anasema, don't you think we are not addressing the right issues here on how this pandemic is affecting us in all departments across the industry? Do you think that we as Tanzanians have enough knowledge on this vaccination issue? And Sunday touched on that, you know, we're actually going on to boosters, etc. Because if the government is not doing enough to educate us, shouldn't the companies take this responsibility? And I think that's a very important question, because, you know, who is responsible to educate? Because we know that the government resources are not there at 120%, but we can disseminate information through these companies. But then also there's a nice debate going on in the chat with Dada Maria about, you know, what is the conducive work environment, and the employer, should they really care where you're working from and the remote working access? And Dada Victoria also asked me to chime in about security. So I'm going to leave the questions to you guys, but I'll just chime in as closing remarks on issues of security. In terms of connectivity and transformation, in terms of digital transformation, this has been a challenge. Yes, we've seen a massive uptake, but then there's also a massive area of people who are disconnected or unincluded, and what my wife and I like to call the unconnected. And these unconnected, we usually tell people that rural is both vertical and horizontal. So if you could go into the middle of Kawe, for example, and there's everything that you need to have, but yet the person cannot afford to go onto the internet. Think of that little kid that you see in the morning in Msasani. Anatembea, unaona kabisa kwamba viatu vimechoka, uniform imechoka, hajabadilisha uniform for the last 2 or 3 years. Pamoja na kwamba yule mtoto kila kitu anacho, environment yote iko conducive kwa yeye to connect to the internet, but they're still going to remain unconnected. So those are the sort of people that we're talking about in terms of unconnected. There's people that even if they're part of your organization, Pam amesema kwa mfano, the drivers, the cleaners, etc. How much of those people can we really say that they're going to work from home? And those are the addressable market, and those are the people that are easily dispensable, but ambao wakiingia mtaani, sasa inaanza kuwa shida sasa in terms of how do you manage that population. So on that note, I would say Dada Victoria, nitaanzisha another session which will talk about the tools that are needed in terms of working from home. And that will specifically talk about the tools. But for this particular session, I would like for you guys to talk about the unconnected or the marginalized. How do we get those people, and how do we continue to take care of those people in the case of lockdowns, etc. Dada Pam, Dada Victoria, then Kaka Muita, and then Dada Pam for your closing remarks, please.
Sure. Okay. Can I be heard? Or still,
yes,
okay.
We can hear you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think Dr. Fred and everybody has addressed the issues extremely well. With regards to my resource question or my security question, it was around this Kidimbwi issue. I absolutely agree with Fred that we have to be, and Pam, we have to be flexible. So if your employee is productive at Cafe Kahawa, and is able to work without giving away the company secrets, then that should be fine. So again, it has to do with your protocols, because there's a lot that's being asked, and several people brought up the issue of wellness. So there's a lot that's being asked of these employees, and I think there has to be compromise on both ends. If that person needs fresh air, needs inspiration to work off-site, they need to be responsible, and it's only right for the employer to be able to monitor, because we have to be we have to observe confidentiality. We have to ensure that we are professional no matter what setting. So those rules can be stretched, but they should not be broken entirely. So common sense has to apply clearly. Yeah. And also, you know, yes, as Sandy has said, perhaps our online time has gone up since COVID. We're all checking on each other, or we're tracking and communicating via all platforms, whether it's WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter, what have you, because this is how we communicate. But as has been mentioned, it can affect one's productivity. So tolerance and understanding, but again, as Dr. Fred said, we got to rejig as HR how we work, and we have to be very clear, because I've been following conversations in the West, especially in the US, what the workplace will look like post-COVID. And there's different schools of thought. But for us here in Tanzania, we need to look at the resources that we have. And it is, you know, it is two worlds, as you said, the haves and the have-nots. So a lot of what we've been talking about will touch those organizations that are clued in, that are well-resourced. But for those that lack resources, there's still a lot of information that's available online that can be accessed offline. And there are a lot of providers that are really working in the tech space, and you know this more than I do. So I think with a lot of innovation, we can still bring them along. Yes, there will be a delay, you know, we just have to be to ensure that the gap doesn't widen. And that is something that COSTECH or the ministry has to really work on, to ensure that we provide the tools, whether it's the smartphones, it's the tablets, and are able to use the sharing economy to provide this information. And there's also scope, I think, for corporates, for CSR to really look at the ways that they can provide this service to the communities that are also their customers and their clients. So let me end it at that.
Okay. Asante sana dada. Kaka Fred, are you still with us?
Sure, I'm still here, Ndugu Mihayo.
Karibu sana.
Actually, I can't agree quite a lot with what Dada Victoria has said. She said fantastic words, and I agree with them 100%. I think in a very broad way, as I wrap it up, it all calls to adaptability into the new ways of working. And HR community has quite a very daunting task ahead of ourselves, me inclusive, because I'm in the fraternity, to ensure that we rejig our teams into adapting to the new ways of working and the virtual culture, what we call here working from anywhere. So I don't have to come to the office to deliver. The issue of productivity and how do we measure performance has come in the chat box, and one asked me in my private capacity in the chat as well. I think, as Dada Vicky has also said, it's a moral obligation that you have goals that you have taken with your employer, and you have to deliver those goals within a given time frame and time spec, and you just have to abide by that. That's why I said that jokers are going to lose their jobs because of productivity and performance issues. And like what we've done here, as Sandy has said, do we check on our employees? Do we check on our families when they're sick? Do we do all these checks? Like what I've done where I work, we have dedicated online check-in portals for staff to check in virtually when they're not feeling good. And we have a dedicated team in HR that on a daily basis, 24 hours, they check on all COVID-related staff and give them all the necessary support that they've picked from the online. We have an app that is used to do that. I'm happy to share the details with whoever is interested to learn about this. But chiefly, again, is like here in Uganda, we are already now moving from educating employees in the virtual technology and virtual space of working to the customer now, and pushing a lot of our customer bases into virtual online transacting, into virtual apps, into digital channels. So we see we're already moving ahead of the curve. And that is what should be telling our people to embrace the new way of doing things. If the customers can embrace this, why not employees? Because other roles like bank tellers are going to die off 100% completely. Roles like call centers are not going to be there in the next coming years. We should think ahead the curve and do massive knowledge investment, to call it that way, that really engineers the minds of both the old and the young and the millennials, the new ways of working. Otherwise, adaptability is going to be very, very hard. And finally, people must embrace and accept that COVID is there. Before we do that, and before somebody is hit by COVID, my wife was with COVID the other day. She's just recuperating. And we have a story to tell. You have a story to tell. Pam has a story to tell. Sandy has told the story. But when you wake up on a Saturday morning and see our national stadium full of hundreds of thousands of people, how many people got it from there and took it to their loved ones? It's a moral obligation for everybody to keep safe. It is as simple as that. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of communication to our rural folks and the urban folks to accept that COVID is real and it is there. Thank you.
Asante sana, bro. Asante sana. Nashukuru sana. And say hi to all the Sebos out there. Dada Pam, the floor is yours. You've gone on for 2 hours. You're on mute, so please unmute your mic.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay.
It's been very interesting, and I thank you everybody for joining, really, and Fred. And I'm wondering if Tamika is still on from another continent. It's been on for an hour and some now. So before I do a briefing, a closing remark, I wanted to bring to attention some of the comments that came up that I feel are important to mention. There's a question from Arnold and Lunda. I don't know if I can find it and read it. I think it's very important. The point of Lunda's question is, how should organizations manage employee information security concerns while employees work remotely? And I think here is everyone will need to work on various protocols. This is where we come in about policies, regulation, and protocol. SOPs have to change, but also security clearance. Now, companies will need to invest in putting, boundaries and roadblocks and accessibility to each employee in an organization at different level. So there will be people who will only be able to access the system up to a level 1. Maybe it's just changing data or inputting data. You can't change any other important data such as profiles, or depending on what service you're providing. But this is where we're gonna go. And I think, Miayo, you can dwell into that in your next session when you have it, about the protocols involved when you set up a system and accessibility to staff. And I think that will be, it's probably gonna be easier, and not everybody's gonna be able to access the same type of platforms or profiles or data just for security reason. And that will be decided by the company itself. The other point that I wanted to bring attention to was Arnold. He says, great point about the need for more empathy at the time for staff, but just how does this relate to accountability and performance? Just curious how this applies for service providers to organization. Do we still hold them to account and deadlines with the same seriousness, or are we more empathetic when they slip? And I think that's why I wanted to read that. I think it's something that I'm going to throw out there, and we're going to stay with it, and everybody has to think about it, because we're promoting empathy and being more tolerant because of mental health and the stress people have been going through, mothers at home taking care of the elders, maybe the special need kids at home, and supervise their online education, but also at the same time ensuring they juggle the Zoom meeting that has been called at odd hours in the morning, the mid-morning or afternoon. I think it's a very relevant question. How do we handle this? Because if we're going to be empathetic to the mothers, our employee, are we going to apply this to service providers? Because that service provider, maybe they're going also through a hard time, right? So that's one of the comment that I found that was very important to bring up. I think you also replied to it, Mihayo, the question of Maria. She also brings up very important point. And I think that's what is relevant to all our conversation in working from home. It's no longer about where you're working. It's about how much you're going to produce. And it calls for maturity. And basically, she's also mentioned it's individual integrity, about health and safety, and your responsibility not to put yourself into risk. The company has given you the responsibility, has given you the environment for safe isolation through working from home, or whatever. It's on you, right? You're solely responsible for that. And that's where we call into maturity, individual integrity. And mental sanity, I guess also that's what called from us, kuondoka kwenda kufanya kazi kidimbwi. I just want to be near the beach. But if I still produce as much, or I perform as well, I think that should be enough for the employer. But again, this ties into the attitude that Fred was talking about, and mental, and we need to change our mindset, our attitude to work, right? How does that work? And how's the culture of companies when they come to performance, and it all ties in together. But I do believe we're ready. We're ready. We just need the attitude and the mindset. We were, shall I say, accelerated into this environment. It would have taken us maybe 10 years to even consider. But I'm hoping that my fellow Tanzanians have actually now, they've actually opened up, and we are no longer confined to what we know, the traditional way of working. There will be security concerns. but we have to rethink workflow and processes, and everything will just tie in, including the policies and everything else we talked about. Yeah. And I think for me, I think there's still a conversation needs to continue. And thank you for having reached out to be able to discuss this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for accepting. Karibu Sana, and thank you for accepting to talk to us at Technologia. And like you said, I think I'm very grateful for all your inputs, including your colleagues' input, that you've been able to bring them in. I know that Victoria has been a follower since our first session, and this is our third session. And I hope she continues to be a follower, asking us great questions. But I think I need you guys to bring me someone who we can talk to about the bigger scale of things, in terms of not just our companies. We've addressed our companies, but I think the question that we leave unanswered is, what do we do for the informal sector? Like Arnold rightfully said, what about the vendors, the suppliers? How many mamantilias went out of business because, you know, Masaki went dead? And security guards who are unemployed. You talked about hotel workers that were laid off. Whole sectors have gone quiet. What are these people doing now? You know, in the US, they were giving stimulus checks. Dada Victoria came up and alluded to that. I think we need to amplify this conversation, Dada Pam, and with your help, we will get the right people on board to start discussing about what are we doing as a nation to safeguard. How can we, what we call in, like what you said in security, how do we whitelist a certain area and that area doesn't get out of that zone? You know what I mean? If people can be safe in a zone, in the US right now, they're zoning people and they're saying these clusters in these states, in these counties are COVID free. So these guys can have a little bit more mobility, whereas these areas are high in COVID, so they need to be locked down. Are those things practical in Tanzania? I mean, look at us right now. Mtu anaumwa COVID Dar es Salaam, tunasafiri, tunaenda kuzika mkoani. What are we leaving in our hometowns? We haven't had that discussion. So thank you very much, Dada Pam, for talking to us about the health of our company, but then what about the health of our villages? What about the health of our middle class, our lower class, and our working class in Tanzania? Asanteni sana kwa kusikiliza Teknolojia, na I hope you can join us next, the last Tuesday of September, where we'll have someone who will be talking to us about how you design your house and make it COVID friendly. How do you get that home office in there? Thank you very much and take care.
Asante, thank you very much.
Pam.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
All right, bye. Bye. Frank.